He thought she was just another shadow in the alley. But in 3 minutes, she shattered the walls around a billionaire's heart and revealed a truth that would change everything. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. It was a cold night. Millionaire John Wick left the charity gala halfway through. The lights, the wine, the polite applause, it all felt stifling. He needed air, space, a break from the performative smiles. So he decided to walk back to his car through the alley behind the hotel, a shortcut he'd taken before. Quiet, unassuming, safer than it looked. But not that night. Less than 2 minutes in, 3 men emerged from the shadows and blocked his path. Well, a rich guy lost his way. Watch, wallet, ring. John didn't flinch, his stance calm, but his eyes sharp, calculating. Then, one of them stepped forward and pulled a knife. Before he could react, a voice rang out, raspy, steady, and unmistakably female. "Cops are on the way. You've got 3 seconds." They turned. From the darkness, a young woman stepped into the dim light. Her coat was worn, her hair tangled, eyes unreadable. In one hand, she gripped a rusty metal pipe. She didn't wait for them to test her. She swung hard. The ringleader went down, groaning. The others backed off, eyes wide. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. The threat worked. They bolted. John stood frozen. The woman turned to leave, as quietly as she'd arrived. "Wait," he called after her. "You just saved me. At least tell me your name." She looked over her shoulder, voice low but firm. "I didn't do it for money. And whatever I need, it's not something you carry in your pocket." And then she disappeared into the night. But her image stayed with him, etched into his mind, long after the alley was quiet again. 3 days had passed. Not a word. Not a trace. Just the echo of her voice still lingering somewhere in the corners of his mind. John Wick hadn't spoken about the incident to anyone, not to his security chief, not to his assistant. He couldn't explain why, but he wanted to keep it to himself, like a small flame cupped in his hand, something fragile he wasn't ready to expose. Then, that morning, as he was going over quarterly reports, his secretary's voice came softly through the intercom. "Mr. Wick, there's a young woman in the lobby. She says you told her to come if she ever needed help." He didn't need to ask who. He already knew. He closed the folder in front of him without a word, stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out. The lobby was quiet, glass walls casting soft light across the floor. And there she was, standing near the edge, hands loosely clasped, eyes scanning the space as if calculating every exit. She wore the same coat, but this time it had been cleaned. Her jeans were frayed, but not torn. The boots still worn. Her hair was pulled back, and there was no trace of makeup on her face. But nothing about her looked apologetic. She stood like someone who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. Their eyes met. Neither of them smiled. He stepped closer. She didn't move. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "I don't have a resume, no references, no address." A pause, then she added, "But I need a chance." There was no tremble, no shame in her tone, only that same steady edge he remembered, like steel dulled by time, but not broken. John didn't respond immediately. He studied her face. Not just the details. He studied the silence behind her expression. The way she held herself upright, yet slightly turned away, as if always ready to walk again. He thought of the alley, of how quickly she'd acted, of the way she'd disappeared without asking for anything. He nodded once. "I have an opening. Personal assistant. It's not glamorous." A pause. "It's demanding, fast-paced, requires discretion, stamina, and thick skin." She looked at him squarely. Sounds familiar. You'd be working directly with me. It's not a favor. You'd have to earn it, same as anyone else. That's all I want. They were both quiet for a beat. He motioned for her to follow. Come upstairs. Let's get you set up. As she walked beside him toward the elevators, she didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She didn't offer some rehearsed line about redemption or starting over, and he didn't expect her to. What passed between them wasn't gratitude. It was something older, harder, respect. In her silence, there was no desperation. In his offer, no pity. Two people. Strangers. Connected not by kindness, but by an understanding neither one had to explain out loud. And as the elevator doors closed behind them, John Wick realized something strange. He didn't know her name. And somehow it didn't matter. Not yet. From the moment Layla stepped into the heart of the company, her presence stirred the kind of attention no press release could prepare for. She didn't arrive in heels or with a blowout. She wore the same worn boots and simple clothes that fit too loosely around her thin frame. Her hair was pulled back plainly, her face free of makeup. There was no jewelry, no pretense. Just her, and that quiet, almost unshakable stillness. She walked into the building like she belonged to no one. The glass walls of Wick & Coer's executive floor were built to reflect power and polish. But behind them, curiosity moved quickly. Heads turned. Fingers pointed discreetly. Voices lowered but sharpened. Who is she? An intern? No, she's with him. His new assistant. You're kidding. Where's HR in all this? I heard she just showed up. No resume, no interview. Must be something else going on. Nobody gets in like that. She heard it all. Not directly. Never directly. But she felt it, the way people feel a draft in a sealed room. Whispered suspicion has its own weight, and it clings to the back of the neck like damp air. Layla didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She simply worked. The first 3 days, she kept her head down. She learned the company software on her own. After hours, in silence, with a small notepad and an old pen that sometimes ran out of ink. She asked no questions, made no noise, and drank plain coffee from a chipped mug she brought from home. By the 4th day, things shifted. There was a financial projection on the CEO's desk, thick, bound, and already reviewed by 2 senior analysts, but Layla saw it while organizing John's schedule. Something didn't sit right. The numbers were clean. Too clean. She paused. Looked again. There it was. A miscalculation in projected growth margins. Subtle, but off by enough to snowball into millions in the next quarter. She quietly flagged it. When John returned to his office, she handed him a page with the figures circled. No preface, no long explanation. He looked up at her, eyebrows raised. Where'd you learn this? Her voice was calm. I used to work in finance, before everything collapsed. He paused, then asked, Everything? Layla met his gaze for just a second. Her eyes were dry, clear, but there was a kind of ache buried there, beneath the calm. Family, life, identity. She didn't offer more. He didn't press. But something shifted in him, too. He had seen people fake competence, flawlessly. She wasn't performing. She was simply capable. That night, he reviewed the full projection again. She had been exactly right. The next morning, she arrived early. Again. Same boots, same expressionless face, same quiet strength, and the whispers around her grew sharper. So she can do numbers. Big deal. Still doesn't explain how she got in. Must be sleeping with someone. Maybe she's related to him. Illegitimate daughter or something? Layla heard none of it firsthand. But she knew. Of course she knew. It was in the glances, the sudden silence when she entered a room, the way conversations changed tone when she passed by, but she didn't respond, not with words. Instead, during the weekly department review, she sat quietly at the far end of the conference table. She didn't speak. She didn't correct. She just listened. Until someone misquoted a supplier agreement, claiming a clause that didn't exist. Layla raised her hand, just slightly. Eyes turned. "That clause is from last quarter's contract," she said, voice steady. "The current version was amended on March 3rd. I can pull it up if you need." A beat of silence. Then John nodded. "She's right. Let's adjust accordingly." She didn't look around, didn't gloat, just made a note in her file and kept working. After the meeting, one of the department heads approached her near the elevators. "You know," the woman said, her voice sugar-dipped and thin, "some of us had to climb a long way to sit at that table." Layla looked at her. No smile, no resentment. "Then you know what it costs to fall from it." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Alone. Behind her, the woman said nothing. The truth is, Layla had no armor, no mentors, no network, but she had one thing the rest of them underestimated. She wasn't afraid of starting from the bottom, because she'd already lived beneath it. And every day she walked into that office, she did so with the knowledge that every whisper, every stare, every sideways glance wasn't proof of her weakness. It was proof she made them nervous, not because she was loud, but because she didn't need to be. The ballroom shimmered with polished silverware and soft piano music. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated like perfume above heads, tilted just slightly too far back. Every inch of the investor gala was curated to suggest wealth that didn't need to speak its name. Layla moved through it quietly. Not like a guest. Not like a stranger either. Something in between. She wore a black dress that fit her simply. No sequins, no shimmer. Just a clean silhouette that let her fade into the edges of conversation. Until someone called on her. And when they did, she answered. In French. It wasn't a party trick. It wasn't even intentional. It was reflex. The diplomat from Marseille had misunderstood a contract clause. Layla stepped in to clarify. Precise accent. No hesitation. The man smiled. Genuinely impressed, John noticed. So did everyone else, including the older woman sitting near John, her diamonds catching the chandelier light like small stars. She leaned in close, speaking without lowering her voice. She doesn't belong in your office, Mr. Wick. Then, after a pause, her eyes narrowed. She belongs in this room. Or at least, she used to. John said nothing. But the words settled over his shoulders like dust stirred in an old room. That night, back in his penthouse office, John poured himself a drink he didn't finish. He turned off the music, turned off the city lights beyond the glass, and opened his archives. Not the digital ones. Those were sanitized. The real records were in boxes, stacked behind a locked cabinet in the back. Contracts, letters, mergers, dissolutions, names that once mattered, most of which he'd long forgotten, until he found it. Reed Enterprises, 5 years ago, a luxury import firm with family ties and deep old money roots, collapsed almost overnight when a string of major partnerships were abruptly terminated. One of those partnerships was with his company. The recommendation had come from external analysts: cut underperforming clients ahead of a major merger, maximize margins, eliminate liability. It was clean on paper, strategic, but not on the ground. John flipped through the file until he reached the press article. Black and white, grainy, tucked between financial reviews. There she was. Layla, standing beside a man and woman in formal evening wear. Younger, fuller-faced. Eyes brighter, but still the same shape, still the same stillness. The caption read, "Daughter of Gregory and Camille Reed attends Foundation Benefit, 2016. He stared at it for a long time. The next morning, he didn't call her in. He waited. By late afternoon, when she knocked quietly on his office door, he was ready. She stepped inside, notebook in hand, unaware of the paper lying face down on his desk. He looked up. "Quiet. We need to talk." Her posture didn't change, but something flickered, barely, a slight tightening at the corners of her eyes. He turned the photo around. Let it rest between them. She didn't reach for it, didn't speak, just looked, then finally, "So, you know." It wasn't a question, more like a statement long past its due. John's voice was low. "Why didn't you tell me?" She met his gaze. This time she didn't drop it, because it wouldn't have changed anything. "You would have still hired me, or not. I didn't want to walk through that door as someone's daughter." He nodded once. Slowly. Still not satisfied. "Your family lost everything. Because of a signature I made." Her voice didn't rise, but the words landed with the weight of someone who had rehearsed them in silence for years. "Yes, one signature, but not just yours." She looked at him then, not with anger, not even blame, just clarity. "The world we lived in, people like you and my father, it's made of contracts and dinners and signed napkins behind closed doors. I didn't fall out of that world. I was pushed, quietly, efficiently." John leaned back in his chair. The office was too quiet. Outside, traffic blurred in the distance like a memory you can't quite grab. "And now?" Layla gave a soft breath, half a laugh, more breath than sound. "Now I know who I am without all that." She turned to leave. "You don't owe me anything, John. I don't want revenge. I want a life that's mine." He didn't stop her, but the image remained, of her back, her voice, her restraint, of someone who had lost more than she ever said, and carried less bitterness than most who had lost far less. That night, he sat at his desk long after the building emptied. The photograph was still there, catching the soft gold from the desk lamp. And for the first time in years, John Wick stared at a decision he couldn't bury under numbers. Not because it was wrong on paper, but because it had a face now. A name, and a silence that spoke louder than any accusation ever could. The office was quiet that night. Too quiet. John sat behind his desk, light from the lamp casting long shadows across the floor. The city outside his windows pulsed as always, unaware of the war starting inside him. His hands rested on a folder he hadn't opened yet. Not because he was unsure of what was inside. He already knew. He just wasn't sure he was ready to see it written down. Across from him, Layla sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, her voice measured, but her words cut like truth always does, quietly, without apology. "He tried to trade me," she said. "My father." There was no tremble in her voice, only a stillness that spoke of years spent rebuilding herself from the ruins. John didn't interrupt. He let the silence fall and hold, giving her space not as a courtesy, but as respect. "Raymond Carter was the investor we needed," Layla continued, "the only one who hadn't walked away. My father thought, if I married him, he'd save the company." Her eyes flicked to John's, not seeking reaction, just ensuring he heard her fully. He didn't ask. He decided. One signature, one dinner, one ring I never wore. John felt his throat tighten. Not from guilt, at least not the kind he'd been trained to recognize. This was different, older, raw. "So you ran?" Layla nodded. "Before I became part of a contract. Before I disappeared inside someone else's power play." John leaned back, exhaling slowly. His voice, when it came, was low. "Honest. I thought I was making the right decision back then, Cutting weak contracts, streamlining mergers. It was numbers, just numbers. He looked at her now, not as an employee, not even as someone he owed, but as a mirror. But I see now, I was building something that crushed people like you without even noticing. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, and John couldn't escape it. The sharp, cold understanding that the same hand that had signed million-dollar expansions had also signed someone else's undoing. In the days that followed, he didn't sleep much. Instead, he dug. He went back into the archives, not just of his own company, but of Carter's. He read board minutes, parsed financial statements, reopened audit trails no one had looked at in years. And the deeper he went, the clearer it became. Carter hadn't just been opportunistic. He'd been strategic, ruthless. He had recommended companies for termination not because they were failing, but because eliminating them created space for his own acquisitions. And Reed Enterprises had been one of his first targets. One morning, John arrived earlier than usual. The office was dark, the air still. He found it waiting for him on his desk. A single envelope, unmarked. Inside, a photograph of Layla walking alone through Midtown. Folded beneath it, a note printed in bold, mechanical type. Stop digging. Before it's too late, he stood there for a long moment. The photo trembling slightly in his hand. Not because his fingers shook, but because the weight of it refused to sit still. He didn't call security. He didn't show it to anyone. Instead, he turned off the light. Sat down, closed the door, and made a decision. No press, no boardroom speech, no retaliation, not yet. He would finish what he started, not to save her, but because something inside him had cracked open, and what poured out wasn't guilt, it was conviction. Layla didn't know about the photo, not yet. But she saw the change. In the way John watched her now, not with calculation, but with quiet concern. In the way he lingered after meetings, as if weighing words he never quite said. And in the small things. The way he never asked her to stay late, but always did himself. The way he started checking on her work. Not to correct, but to learn. She didn't ask why, because a part of her already knew that beneath his silence, he was beginning to carry something heavier than success. And for the first time in years, Layla realized, maybe she wasn't the only one trying to rebuild something from what had been lost. It happened quietly. No screams, no public spectacle, just a missed call. Then another. And Layla was gone. Her phone, left behind on the corner of her desk, buzzed until the battery died. John was in the middle of a meeting when his assistant slipped him a note. Layla didn't show up today. No one's heard from her. He excused himself without a word. Then his phone rang. Unknown number, he picked up. A voice. Male. Steady. Cold. She's alive. For now. You want her to stay that way? Pause. Stop digging. Drop the Carter investigation. Walk away, or she disappears. The line went dead. He stood still, phone pressed to his chest. No panic. Just silence. John didn't call the police, didn't alert his legal team, didn't hesitate. He moved. The warehouse was on the edge of the city, abandoned on paper, but clearly in use tonight. One working light flickered above the rusted door. Inside, dust floated in the air like memory. The smell of mildew and metal clung to everything. And in the center of it all, Layla, tied to a chair, wrists red beneath coarse rope. Her hair matted slightly at the temples, her face pale but composed. There was a cut near her eyebrow. Dried. The bulb above her buzzed, casting sickly yellow shadows that swayed when she moved. But she didn't look afraid. She looked tired. Like someone who had seen darkness before and refused to blink. The door creaked open. Footsteps, then a familiar voice, quiet, strong. "You came." She turned her head. Her lips curled slightly, not into a smile, something softer, a surrendering of tension. "You really came." John stepped into the light. His coat was soaked from the rain, his collar turned up. There was a gun in his hand, but it stayed lowered. He scanned the room, then met her eyes. "I couldn't let you face the dark again," he said softly. "Not alone. No theatrics, no speeches, just that." He crossed the room, knelt beside her. His hands worked quickly, methodically, cutting the ropes without a word. Her arms dropped, limp. He caught them, held her steady. She tried to rise, stumbled. He steadied her with one arm around her waist. "You shouldn't have come alone," she whispered. "Maybe," he replied. "But I think this time, I came as the right man." Later, in the apartment, his apartment, Layla sat curled on the couch, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea. John sat across from her, tending to her wrist with slow, careful hands. A first aid kit lay open between them. His fingers moved with surprising gentleness for someone known to be ruthless in boardrooms. The silence was thick, but not uncomfortable. She watched him. Studied the man who, not long ago, was just a cold name on a Forbes list. Now here he was, cleaning the blood from her skin with quiet hands and a lowered gaze. She broke the silence. "You don't have to do this." His eyes lifted. Met hers. "No," he said. "I don't." He paused, "But I want to. And for the first time in a long time, I know what I want is right." She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes shifted. Just slightly. A layer of ice cracked. Not melted, just fractured. And that was enough. He rose, turned off the lamp, left the room dim. She curled into the blanket, let her breath fall into rhythm again. Safe. And in the quiet of that evening, they both began to understand something neither had said out loud. They were no longer just surviving. They were starting to choose something more. Each morning in the new apartment began the same way. Not out of routine, but because peace had found its rhythm. Layla would sit at the kitchen table, a warm mug of tea growing cold beside her laptop. Sunlight crept in through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow across her face. Her fingers moved slowly across the keyboard. Not fast, not frantic, but steady. Like each word she typed was a thread stitching together a life she'd once lost. John never asked what she was writing. But every morning he watered the plants on the nearby balcony. Sometimes he stayed longer than he needed to, just enough to hear the quiet click of her keys and the gentle rustle of leaves swaying in the breeze. The silence between them was no longer distance. It had become its own language. One afternoon, as they organized final documents from the now-closed investigation into Carter, who had officially been indicted, Layla paused, looked up from the folders, and spoke softly. "I want to open a shelter." John didn't respond right away, she went on. "Not because I pity the homeless, but because I was one of them. And I know what I needed back then wasn't someone to rescue me. I just needed someone to sit beside me. No rush, no judgment." John set the papers down. He looked at her for a long moment, like each word she spoke reached a place inside him he'd never dared name. "I used to live by numbers," he said quietly. "A person's worth was written in quarterly reports, in clean profit margins. But now, I believe in the people who once got counted as zero." Layla didn't smile. She only nodded. But something in her eyes shimmered, not because she felt validated, but because, for the first time, she felt seen. 3 months later, the shelter opened in a renovated building. No flashing sign, no dramatic ribbon cutting, just warmth, clean space, and sincerity. Layla stood at the front with no podium, no spotlight, Just a simple linen dress and a microphone held in steady hands. Her voice was gentle, but it carried weight, like stones long rested at the bottom of a river. "I used to sleep on a park bench," she began. "I used to walk through this city and feel invisible, like I didn't have a name, like I didn't matter." She paused, letting the quiet settle. "But today I stand here not because I'm special. I'm standing here because I held on to one fragile thing, hope." She looked across the crowd. No tears, just clarity. "If I could start again, anyone can." Among the attendees, John stood near the back. No tailored suit, no spotlight on him. But his eyes followed her like everything he'd built in life had led him to this moment. They hadn't said the words "I love you." They didn't need to. Because the things that truly matter don't begin with "I love you" or "I need you." They begin when someone stays. When someone believes in your voice before you believe in it yourself. When two people choose to build something, not to save each other, but to live beside each other. Together, from what's been broken. The cabin sat quietly by the lake, wrapped in the stillness of dusk. No distractions, no city noise, just the soft lap of water against the dock and the fading breath of sunlight melting into the horizon. Inside, the fire cracked gently. Outside, the world was slowing down. Layla sat barefoot on the wooden porch, knees pulled close, a blanket around her shoulders. Her gaze lingered on the reflection of the sky in the water. Blue slowly turning gold, then amber. John sat beside her, close but not touching, elbows on his knees, quiet in that way only someone at peace can be. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them was soft, full, the kind that grows only after two people have been through fire, and stayed. After a long pause, John's voice broke the quiet. Low, honest. "You changed me, Layla, not with pressure, just by being who you are." She turned, slowly, eyes catching his in the glow of the fire. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. No grand gesture, just a simple offering, held with both hands. He opened it. Inside, a modest ring. Silver. Clean. Real. But it wasn't the ring that made her breath catch. It was the way he looked at her, like nothing in the world had ever made more sense. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Will you marry me?" He paused, letting the words settle between them. "Not because I owe you, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Layla's eyes welled, not with surprise, but with the quiet ache of healing. She blinked slowly, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I used to think I didn't deserve to be loved," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble. "You showed me I was wrong." He smiled then. Soft, small, but full of meaning. No need for more words. He took her hand gently and slid the ring onto her finger, and she let him. They didn't embrace right away. They just sat there, side by side, watching the fire dance, the stars emerge, and the lake go still. It was not a loud moment, no applause, no music, but it was complete. That night they stayed out long after the air turned cold, their fingers intertwined, saying nothing more. Because in that quiet, they had already said everything. And in the stillness of that evening, beneath the weight of all they had been through, one truth settled between them like the firelight. Warm, steady, and true. Love, the kind that lasts, doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stay. They didn't want a grand wedding, no cathedral, no guest list of hundreds, just a space filled with truth. And for them, that meant coming back to where everything had begun. The shelter. The center Layla had built from broken memories. From nights she'd spent on benches. From faces she once passed without a name. Now, Those same people stood beside her, dressed simply but clean, holding flowers they picked themselves, witnessing not just a ceremony, but a quiet revolution of love. Layla wore a cream-colored dress that brushed just above her ankles. No veil, no lace, just soft linen, the kind that moves with the wind. John wore his simplest suit. No tie, sleeves rolled at the wrists, collar open like someone finally breathing freely. There were no violins, just laughter from the courtyard, the sound of birds in the trees. A little boy from the shelter spilled juice on his shirt mid-vows, and everyone laughed, including John. That moment stayed with him more than the rings, because it was real, beautiful in its imperfection. When the ceremony ended, Layla didn't cry. She just leaned her forehead against John's and whispered, "I used to think I only had one shot at life, but somehow, life gave me a second one." And John, whose life had been built on deadlines and deals, closed his eyes and held her like a man who finally understood time. A few months later, Layla handed John a small box. No occasion, just a quiet evening at home. The fireplace hummed, rain whispered against the windows. He opened it slowly. Inside, a pregnancy test. 2 lines. And beneath it, a note written in her soft handwriting. "We're going to be 3. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the tiny object, as if the weight of it reached deeper than words ever could. Then finally, in a voice lower than usual, he said, "You gave me a new life, Layla. Now, I'll protect everything we've built, no matter what it takes." She smiled, eyes glistening, not with surprise, but with recognition, like she'd known this man was waiting beneath the old version all along. They sat on the couch after that, wrapped in the same blanket, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting lightly on her stomach. The room was quiet. But in that silence, something sacred pulsed, stronger than promises, louder than celebration. It was belonging. Because family, for them, wasn't something born from blood. It was a place, a feeling, a quiet knowing that this time they were home, and they didn't have to be afraid anymore. She had nothing, but she gave him everything. Not by being perfect, but by daring to love, even when the world had stopped believing in her. If this story reminded you of something, or someone, you once knew, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to leave a comment below. You can share a memory, a thought, or simply tell us how the story made you feel. And if you'd like, you can rate the story from 1 to 10. Not for us, but for others who may need a story like this today. Thank you for spending your time with us.